This is the level of resistance as far as space the rosters and kiosks. The reservation policies were not implemented. That's why the university had to put a nodal officer, especially for this purpose, in place. And incidentally, uh, there was somebody who was looking after the work of the reservation for all categories at one time before I took over SCST and then Nodal PWD also that time. And that colleague also happened to be from Zakristan College only. So Zakristan College has played an important role, not just in this, but I was talking to you about why this conference is taking place in a very significant manner. Today we talk of reservations and employment and it's a very accepted fact that seeing the person with disabilities in employment, in workplace, is something that people don't recognize. But just as there was resistance to disability studies even within the Department of English a few years ago, there was resistance as far as the employment of persons with disabilities was also concerned, not very long, around 30, 35 years ago, and it was that time that Zakir Hussain Evening College, none other, Zakir Hussain Evening College was one of the few earliest colleges, one of the few earliest colleges that voluntarily and without resistance accepted a person with disability who is completing his term at the end of this month and retiring on 31st March. He was a gold medalist for both BA and MA, for whom get a job. At one time he thought of taking up a positions away from academics because the resistance was so much. At that time it was Zakir Hussain Evening College, and that just the month and just with 10 days before he is to retire, this conference on disability studies again is an important step forward as far as this institution is concerned. So, congratulations on being proactive 35 years ago and today, and I'm sure in future also. Talking about the theme of the conference, disabled bodies, able subjects. I think this is a very important binary test setup. A movement from bodies to subjects. The body is corporeal, is physical, is lifeless. One should mention that, but when someone passes away, the individual ceases to exist, and the reference term then is body. Where is the body? Where to keep the body? What to do with the body? Not realizing that just an hour ago the person had a life and an identity. So from a corporality, physicality, lifelessness to a state of identity, subjectivity, individuality, that's the moment I understand this conference proposes to interrogate. And that's the moment that is not just something that's happening today. Today also, despite all the enlightenment we're supposed to be claiming in the 21st century, despite all the globalization, despite all our concern with human rights, disabled people, persons with disabilities are not seen as persons but only disabled persons. And that's also a very important terminological movement underlying which is the philosophical idea of movement from disability to individuality, from disabled persons to person with disability. It's that movement that embodies the movement from disabled bodies to able subjects. Therefore, when our legislation on disability was being drafted, happily I've been a part of both the legislations on disability, the Persons with Disabilities Act 1995 and the RPD Act 2016, which is now in operation, now in force. In both cases, the terminology was hotly debated. And one wondered what terminology to use. And ultimately, the persons with disability term was accepted in favor, in opposition to any other, only because in this expression, the emphasis is first on person, then on the disability of the person, whereas in the term disabled bodies, the emphasis is first on disability, then on body or identity. So ability and disability. Is there anything called ability? Is there anything called disability? Is also a question we need to interrogate. Because the moment it's a disabled body to able subjects, that means these two states of existence are given. They are accepted. I would like you to go and interrogate further and to see whether the binary that is sought to be created between ability and disability should exist, does it exist, can exist. To illustrate this point, I just want to quote a text which all of you have read. I mean, the very text I am going to quote today. I sat in late last night and prepared a whole list. And I wanted to talk a lot, but I said I will be very responsible chairperson and veteran of the conference. And I will request Madhurika to indicate to me is 10:54 so that there's a typo mode of thanks after that. And, what's the time?
So like it's 10:52.
Oh, okay. Well, I can't be that brief. I can't be that brief. Yeah. So yes. So I would like to talk about the text, which all of you have read from childhood till today. At least I read this very child, and in different forms and manifestations. The text is none other than our familiar Gulliver's Travels. You are familiar with that? Now, what is Gulliver's Travels? Here is a character, a pretty fine individual, and you will wonder why I'm talking about it in the conference on disability, because it's nothing to do with disability. Fine individual who goes on the voyage, who different interesting places he goes to visit, and it seemed to be a satire, it seemed to be a comment from the 18th century, it seemed to be a comment to the modern Tories and wigs and food, not all of them. To me, this appears to be the first novel on disability. It is the first that I know, which is something that I'm very happy to be corrected. One thing about me, you may have any quarrel with me, that's different, but I'm always willing to learn. I see nothing wrong with that. You know, when you're imbibing knowledge from others, you are enriching yourself. The other person may be getting poorer or not, I don't know. I'm surely getting richer, and I prefer the my own riches, not the poverty or riches of other person. So yeah, so if there is a text before this, there's a novel, fiction I'm talking about. So to me, this is the first novel about disability. Why is the first novel on disability? Because here we have somebody whom we regard within quote able subject. And when Gulliver goes to the land of the Lilliputians, he discovered that he is a disabled body. People jump over him, laugh with him, play with him, and those poor Lilliputians who overpower him so much that he cannot do much. They tie him down, and he is totally at the mercy of the small little Lilliputians who are maybe 6 inches tall also, but they cannot manage this 5.5, 5, 6 or whatever he is. And that is the time he realizes that his physicality does not grant him, does not necessarily grant him ability. His concept of the normative is different from the concept of the normative of the Lilliputians, because they are being in majority rule the roost. They decide what is normal and what is not normal. Perfectly fine, no problem. Chalo, one more illusion broken. But this is not all. When he goes to the land of the problem land, there's a bigger problem that he becomes a Lilliput there. He's too small and paid around again once again. Who is then the real Gulliver? Which is the normal Gulliver? The Gulliver we saw at the beginning of the text. The Gulliver with the Lilliputians who was disabled because he was taller than them. Or the Gulliver with the broken legs who is again disabled. A disabled body because he is smaller than them. In both cases, the poor man seems to be helpless, and he would have left wondering as to what is wrong. The point I'm trying to make is there something called ability at all? What is an able subject? What is ability? The whole idea of ability. From where do we draw it? And where do we take it to? Because the ability means that it's an objective standard. But is anyone, there's a perfect standard. There's a standard of judgment and yardsticks of measurement which are universal. The whole idea of disability, one of my PhD students said, and many of my PhD students are here, PhD students, I'm so happy that number of them are presenting. And one of them is are contesting this very idea of universality of disability. Is disability a universal experience or is it a subjective experience? Because if it is subjective experience, then every experience of disability has to be different. As indeed, every experience of ability is also different. You cannot say that all people who are so-called non-disabled experience the same thing. No, that doesn't happen. I'm sure the way Vikas experiences and the Justin experiences, Buddhist experiences, life are very, very different. Surely, it will be very strange if they all start to experience the same way, thinking same way, behaving same way. That will be easy also that one person, if one person will leave, other person can go to the class and teach the same way and there will be no gap at all. But that doesn't happen. And if all of us are different, and all of us are, nobody is perfect, and all of us have shortcomings and drawbacks, and areas in which we need support, then what is ability? Is there something about ability or everything is ability? Or ability is different for every person? This is a point the conference should examine. The whole idea of ability and how do you define ability? To me, ability is only one thing, to be able to do whatever you can do, and not to be judged by the standard of what somebody else is doing. If you use this definition of ability, then the binary between disability and ability immediately ceases to exist. It immediately ceases to exist because even a person whom you call a person with disability or a disabled body has some ability. Even a person who is a failure in class, a person who is uneducated, a person who may be anything has some ability. There's nobody who, very rarely you'll find those very rare cases who would have no ability. And if everybody has some ability and only seeks and prays and hopes for and opportunities to manifest those abilities to the best of his or her potential, if that is ability, then there's nothing called disability because everybody can do that. But then another question arises. Does everybody have the opportunity and the space to manifest his or her abilities? There's not a thing on terminology. Some got what we call persons with disabilities and special abilities. I see nothing special about it. I mean, I'm able to talk, eat, drink, sleep, think, get angry or whatever, the same way as anybody else. What is special ability is this? I'm able to read, write, type. The methodology may be different. But the end result being the same, is there called special ability? Then people came to another term called different behavior, which I find even more peculiar. Because what is so different? Everybody is different. If I am different from other, so is everybody sitting in his room different from one another. So if the person with disability is to be designated as person with differently able, then all of us are differently able, so all of us are persons with disability. So that doesn't work. And that doesn't work precisely because there is a kind of prerequisite we have assigned to ability and disability. And it's that prerequisite we need to shed if you really want to understand and want to arrive at a holistic understanding of disability. I often quote this incident from Mahabharata, which to me, I talked about Gulliver's Travels, I said it was the first disability novel. When it comes to first disability text, I would say one of the earliest texts that I would put it in his ancient history is Mahabharata. Nobody, in fact, one day, maybe after I retire, I want to write the entire Mahabharata from the Dhritarashtra point of view. Nobody has done that so far. It needs to be done. There is someone who has no fault of his own. Okay, he may not be able to see, but he is the eldest. Yet he is denied kingship on account of the fact that he is visually impaired. The visually impaired person cannot rule. He can do everything else. He cannot rule. In fact, there's a prophecy of Vyas. When Vyas comes out and Kunti asks whether uh, the son would be very alone. He says son would be everything. He will fight with 100 elephants and all that. But because of the curse of his mother, fault of his mother, he will be visually impaired. And there is, if you see the two renderings of Mahabharata, one of the students, Aishwarya, who's presently is working on text intertextuality between text and films of disability. She had pointed out to me, acknowledgements are very important even to all students, that you should see this was she presented in a presentation, PhD presentation. Look at the two versions of Mahabharata, the 1987 B.R. Chopra version and the 2013 Ekta Kapoor version. The way it's actually presented in opposition to his brother, in the interaction with his brother, and the way he is presenting is very, very different. Ekta Kapoor's presentation is much more nuanced, much more powerful, much more positive as far as the abilities of Fritz Flash are concerned. I would argue at another place that this change that's come about in the period of 25-26 years from 1987, where Dhritarashtra is a very weak, submissive person, and very weak, very submissive to an active Dhritarashtra who fights with elephants, who puts a strong opposition to his family, to his brother in Ekta Kapoor serial, is also the result of the evolution of disability, understanding and response that has taken place in society, in our culture, over a period of 25-26 years. And those 26 years from 1987 and 2013, I argue one of the most important quarter of a century in the history of disability movements and disability rights in India. A lot happened. In fact, that period would never come back, perhaps. This is one thing I want to stress also. When you talk about, when you study disability, do talk about rights, not just academics and texts, which often the mistake that we make. When Shilpa and I did a chapter recently, which Vikas had referred to in my introduction to all of you, and there we strongly argue that there cannot be any disability text without disability rights. There is a serious correlation. And therefore, I was very surprised. I'll come back later, don't worry. I'm not losing my thread. But yeah, it's important. I was very surprised when on 2nd of March, when our department had the International Centenary Conference, and we had a writers' session. One of the writers that we had in the session was Mahesh Tatani. And I asked him in that session about the two texts that he had on disability, two very strong texts on disability, Tara and Breaking for the Queen. And I asked him whether he was conscious of disability components, disability dimensions of these texts. And he said, no. No, this is what we're thinking. Somebody writing in 1990s, having such a strong representation of disability, how could a writer not be conscious? Is it that writers still do not want to acknowledge their concern, their engagement with disability? Is it that they are unconscious? There is something called disability consciousness, which goes beyond the consciousness of the writer and which indirectly impinges upon a text. And that's why we have such two powerful texts of Mahesh Tatani, despite the fact the writer himself denies that he had any serious thought on disability beyond using it as just one of the aspects in the text. But anyone reading those texts and having some idea of disability theory and disability issues would know that these are not just casual engagement. These are not just casual references. These texts are not just casual representations of disability. I remember I had done a lecture for Bhagat College, which I understand many people saw. It was an online lecture live on the university. And in that, how I argued how each sentence in Tara, for instance, and greatly from the Queen we have in our MPhil also. So did we, in the last semester we had Tara also, Maharashtra. These are very strong disability texts. And then the writer denies in a very public platform that he had anything directly to do with disability. This is what we're thinking. Where do we see disability text between the writer and the reader? Is it only our interpretation, but we got reader's response? And that may happen, I'm sure. If Shakespeare was to read criticism on his plays, he'll be horrified and when we go back to his grave. He'll be horrified because when you go, in fact, almost everything that we talk about Shakespeare is something he would never have thought about. There's no denying that fact. Or is there? Perhaps it's thought about that. I don't know. But is the text definitely has an identity beyond the author. But is there something called disability consciousness which writers indirectly, unconsciously acquire? And that disability or human rights, I always like to see everything in the context of human rights. Because again, we get into own shadows. Disability studies, Dalit studies, gender studies, queer studies. We are then again being specific. It's important to specificity is very important. But also important is the fact that we need to look at life holistically. And perhaps there is a consciousness. I'm trying to define that term statement. There is a consciousness which pervades the writer. Writer may not be conscious and maybe perhaps it's the first time Mahindra was ever asked this question. Perhaps, I don't know. Because his answers are very straightforward on that. And yet, I must tell you, I saw one of the performances of Tara in the Mani Auditorium a few years ago, 3, 4 years ago. And the girl who acted Tara was the actor, but herself a person on wheelchair. Obviously, the director saw something in the character of Tara as it exists in the text to have as actor one of the girls who was on wheelchair herself. Why would that be required? And therefore, coming back to Ekta Kapoor now, I would say the way Ekta Kapoor presents Dhritarashtra, and from there I go back to Mahabharata. I lost my time, don't worry. But I'm very conscious that I crossed my time now, so I wind up very soon. Yes, so the way Ekta Kapoor represents Dhritarashtra is the 21st century person with disability. The way B.R. Chopra presents Dhritarashtra is the 20th century person with disability, struggling, who is restless, but still trying to find his way in the society. In the 2013 version of Mahabharata, the Dhritarashtra has already found his way, perhaps. There's a great difference. Look at the two versions as far as Dhritarashtra is concerned, but there's much to be said for Dhritarashtra. Most of it, that if as Dhritarashtra he could not rule because he was visually impaired, then, my dear friends, I wonder from where his strength came when Pandu was not available, and then a kingship had to be devolved again. And then again, Dhritarashtra was made a king. If visual impairment was a factor, the fact of visual impairment did not change. But why was it the first time he was not made the king, for second time he was? From where did his capacity as a king come in then? Is it convenience? Is it that we use disability as what I would call, Foucault would call biopower, to assert our own hegemony, our own superiority, our own exclusivity when it suits us? It's that danger that we need to be guarded against. Disability understanding is fine, but seeing disability to elevate ourselves at the cost of others, to use it as an othering experience for others, to use discrimination to feel good fact of ourselves, is not something that will promote anybody's interest of persons with disabilities and our own. Our own because known fact that while even today, many of us, our own, I would say everybody has their own disability. Somebody may be scared of cockroach. That's a disability. Somebody may be scared of water. Somebody may have fear of closed spaces. Somebody may have fear of open spaces. Somebody may be scared of traffic. And so on, so there's no end to it. But as the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities states, the disability is when an individual long-term physical, mental, sensory impairment. I would say infirmity or shortcoming, because there's something called psychosocial disability also, has a potential or becomes a barrier in interaction with society. If our fear of cockroaches, open spaces, closed spaces, everything else becomes a barrier in our interaction with society. Some people are too shy. That's their disability. Some people are extrovert. That's their disability. They just can't sit straight. Some people have fear of loneliness. They just can't be alone. That's their disability. Nobody can say that I have no shortcoming, no disability. So everybody is disabled in some way or the other. And even if you deny that statement, it is a known fact that with age, with time, everybody will have what we call physical or intellectual weakness and disability and deformity or shortcomings which would come in the way of our interaction with society. So all of us someday or other either are or would be persons with disabilities. And if that is the case, as I argued in the beginning, when we talk about disability in a conference like this, we do not talk about for persons with disabilities. We do not talk about disabled bodies, we talk about our bodies. We do not talk about able subjects, we should talk about evolving subjects. And we do not talk about a category or a social class, we talk about all of us, ourselves. And therefore, the conference is not about persons with disabilities, but for ourselves. I wish you all the best, and I'm sure the papers to come will throw more light of many of the issues that are current to this domain. As I said, I already exceeded my time, so I wish I could go on longer, but I would not do that as a responsible chairperson of the college. I wish you all the luck, and thank you very much for inviting me for this.
Thank you, sir, for this very inspiring lecture. I must say that your words have broadened our horizons on a subject which has been around as long as humans have been able to articulate, but which as an academic discipline, which as a way of thinking, which is a way of looking at the world, as a way of understanding the world, which we are only beginning to become cognizant of. So thank you very, very much, sir, for the lecture. May I now invite our officiating principal for the day, Professor Pakiza Saman, to present to Professor Aneja a very small token of our appreciation for him being here and blessing the occasion.
These paintings are handmade paintings by a former colleague who, so she lost her job during the pandemic and now she set up her own business. So she was a former colleague of ours at Zakirus and Evening English Department. So she and her startup are collaborating with us for the conference in sponsoring these gifts for
So nice of you. Please give me my thanks.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. There's a small bit of information. Since we're trying to go as paperless as possible for the conference. So everybody, if I notice the flyer of the conference, there's a QR code at the bottom right of the flyer. So if one just scans the QR code, one will be taken to the conference schedule as well as the abstract booklet. And therefore, we have been able to eliminate a lot of paper from the conference. So that's one. May I now invite the guiding light of our department in the college, and our most senior colleague, Ms. Poonam Kaur, to do the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Aneja, sir, for acceding to our request to place our national conference on from disabled bodies to able subjects. So we couldn't have asked a more a more stated person, eminence of your stature. Uh, while sitting here, I know that what I'm going to say is now trash. Um, as I was reading your bio note, it says that you are a role model for persons with disability. Now that's no doubt. But in a world where ableism exists, your contribution in dispelling the darkness of a benighted world is immense. You are a role model for each one of us. The day is not far when your bio note will include that a Padma Shri has been awarded to you. I speak with conviction, sir. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you as a steward for us.
Thank you, Poonam ma'am. As we draw towards the conclusion of this inaugural session, I thank everybody who's present here, especially Professor Anisha, Professor Pakisa Samat, Professor Padmini Chakravarti, Dr. Anas Datis, and all the participants, all the session chairs, all the students who have volunteered for the conference. Thank you, everybody. We'll now break for tea for 15 minutes. The tea is being served next to the science block. I'm sure all the colleagues from the evening college, from the morning college, students of the college know the place I mean. And for the visitors who are new to the college, our volunteers will escort you, will guide you to the location of the tea. We'll assemble in 15 minutes for two sessions, for two parallel sessions, one here in the seminar room. The other session will be held in room number 102 in the science block. Thank you, everybody.
I'm going to attend this session, seminar room, and yeah, mine is now, I mean, in the science block. Okay? If you want to attend this one, actually the paper in this one. You will go around.
We have to stop.